Hello, everybody. Welcome. I am Heather Nelson. I am a corporate partnership specialist and lead the organization called Bridge. We specialize in helping charities and nonprofits with their corporate partnership. And I am so pleased to be having this conversation today because it is so often misunderstood, I think, why companies really give. And there's lots of blind spots for some of us fundraisers. So before I get started, please introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know who's here live. And if you're watching this on replay, please don't hesitate to also put questions in. I will circle back and answer those questions over the next few weeks as you watch the replay. So do put your questions in. And as I said, today we're going to explore what motivates companies to invest. And I know we're going to see a graphic about this later, but one of the things that really popped out of the report for me is this blind spot we often have, or maybe more a spotlight that we have. It's like companies have money and we need money, and we fail to see all the nuances beyond that. And that is what we're going to talk about today. I'm thrilled that Andy is here. Andy and I connected a few years ago. From my point of view, because of just aligned values and a real common understanding of how to do this work. And I feel like I've learned so much from Andy over the years. And so I hope you do too. I know you will. So here is Andy. I'd like you to introduce yourself to everybody who's listening.
Yeah, thanks so much, Heather. It is great to be here. It's kind of you to say that we met because of shared understanding and values, whereas I feel like we met because I want to be Heather Nelson when I grow up. And it was me being like, hi, I run a similar consultancy. Please help. And you were so generous with your time and your thoughts and your opinion. And I always come away super energized. So thank you for everything you do for the community, but also for today. I'm Andy King, another corporate fundraising consultant. I've been in corporate fundraising for about a decade. And the story I always say is that when I was little, I wanted to be a journalist. And then I met some journalists and I changed my mind. And I realized what I cared about was telling stories that matter to the people they matter to. And that took me into fundraising super fast. We are here to talk about some research that my company conducted at the end of last year, where we spoke to 20 people inside companies, shareholders, CEOs, marketing managers, assistants, to ask them, in their words, why their company gave to charity, how their company chose their charities to give, and in particular, in those cases where they had stopped giving, why. It was a fascinating project, and I'm excited to share some of the key results with you today.
I love that. I know that for any of us who've been doing corporate fundraising for a while, these are the answers that when you say you want the follow-up call for after you got to know, right? Mm-hmm. That you want the answers to, and rarely do you really get the real goods at that point. And so you've got this, insider information perspective for us, and have brought together the themes and things. So I know it's going to be super valuable. And before we get into the detail, let's start with the headline. I mean, first of all, before I get into the headline, everybody should read this full report. This goes without saying. There is nuggets on every page. There's things you can learn from every page. I've read it multiple times, and each time I'm like, oh yeah, I could do this. So everybody read the report. However, we are going to give you some headlines today and some high points. So let's start with that. What is your headline around why companies really give?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. If you want to get the report and you don't have it yet, it's on the Fireside Fundraising website. You can also go to tinyurl.com/why companies give. But the headline is twofold. One, companies don't have to give you money. And that was something that really kind of gagged me throughout the research. I was really shocked by it. The number of times that the companies were like, just a reminder, we don't have to do this. Right. Here are reasons we might choose to.
Yeah.
But we don't have to. And there was a real sense of I think we as charities are like, oh, well, they should. And because they should, they have to. And for some of them, they're not certain that they should. And so that was just something that has like really stuck with me. A particular quote is kind of burned into my mind, which is, "I will always owe my shareholders more than I owe you," which I thought was like a really powerful framing. They don't have to give.
Right.
I'm going to bring up the slide that kind of
Yes.
gives us the key takeaways. And in that space of "I owe my shareholders more than I owe you," a repeated instinct from companies was the approach they regularly got was, "You have money and we need money." And that's not enough. Companies are giving billions of pounds to charities in the UK. They're giving billions of dollars to charities in Canada. But just being a good cause is not enough, because they owe their shareholders more than they owe you. And actually, what they need is some combination of the following. They will always need a compelling story about the cause. They will always need to understand why they should give to specifically you, because you've probably noticed the planet is on fire and children are dying and diseases are getting worse. And if they gave to everything, they would go bankrupt. So right at the center, they need a compelling reason to give to specifically you. Then beyond that, they will need some combination of the following 6 things. Which of the 6 matter and which of the 6 matter most is going to vary from company to company. But in general, what drove companies to give and to give to the charities they chose were, 1, alignment. That there was an obvious relevance between the company and the charity. That obvious relevance might be, they're a sun cream company and you're a cancer charity. There's a real obvious link there. But the alignment might also be that you're both based in Hamilton and your programs are in Hamilton and all of their colleagues live in Hamilton. Or it might be that you both work with children. Your service users are children, their customers are children. Your programs are aligned, your organizations are aligned. The next thing is that staff will care. And it's really easy to hear that staff can volunteer, but that is not what I said. I said that staff will care. What this means is when they share about the partnership on Slack or on Teams or whatever internal channel they use, when they share about the partnership, loads of people press the heart react, or loads of people press thumbs up, and their colleagues feel good about it. Business benefits is very often about content. This is stuff for their ESG frameworks. This is stuff for social value, or this is they're trying to appeal to young men and they think the content of your cause is going to help them do that. There was another genuine quote, word for word. This charity's TikTok demographics were the demographics we were looking for. You have an audience and they want it. Yeah. Business benefits. Internal champion, someone internally really cares about the cause and is willing to be annoying about it. Very commonly, this is health charities, have a patient or a family member of a patient in the organization willing to rattle some cages. Track record, you feel like a safe pair of hands, you've got impressive names on your list. Or scale of impact, they can truly see the difference that they will make. Either you're going to help a big number of people or you have a clear before and after picture. So these are the things that might drive a company to give, and each company will care about a different combination. For one company, they might need alignment and track record. Another might need scale of impact and an internal champion. It's worth, as a charity, thinking about, of these 6 on the outside, where are you strongest? And finding the companies that care about those things.
That's a great piece of advice. And I'd love people to pop in the chat if there's like one of these 6 that, really resonates with them or is a new one for them. I loved how you just described staff will care, because I do think we talk so much and get so distracted by employee volunteerism, employee engagement, which I imagine is going to come, we're going to talk about more later. But the staff will care. I mean, I sometimes talk about how, the reason to put a LinkedIn post up about your partnership is so that everybody who works at that organization hits like, and people are like, why would you do that? I'm like, because you know what? If then around the cooler chat or in the Zoom room or whatever, that people start talking about it, it just shows enthusiasm for your partnership. That's a win. Even if everybody didn't travel to, plant trees or paint a wall or whatever the activity is. So I love that repositioning. It really de-escalates, how sometimes we're thinking about those things. And also this idea of where are your strengths on this continuum? And some of these are much easier, I think, to become stronger in relatively easily, whereas some of these, take a greater amount of effort to get strong at. So it's also useful for you to say, okay, what are some, I'm always reluctant to say low hanging fruit, because frankly, low hanging fruit can often still be quite a lot of work, but which are the ones that you think you could, really show, gold star on more easily, and, knock those off first while you're, chipping away at some of these ones that may require, greater team collaboration or more time horizon, etc. So, or where, you may just have a really hard time hitting that kind of visibility that, leads to certain types of partnerships. So that is very helpful. Okay, we're going to go on to the next question. And I wanted to ask, because you were having these conversations, and when we are talking a little bit about some of these blind spots, I think fundraisers have going into it, or focus areas that they are, what is an assumption that nonprofits often make about why companies give beyond, hey, they have money, that leads to, maybe some choices that aren't as helpful?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this was a huge learning for me, actually. We changed a couple of things about our approach and our advice based on this research. But one thing, we did a survey to a bunch of corporate fundraisers before we did the research. What do you think we will find? So that we could then find what we found and compare the things. And the number one word that came back from corporate fundraisers, over 100 of them filled out the survey: reputation. Reputation, reputation, reputation. Companies are doing this for reputational gains. People are doing this for their reputation. Reputation didn't come up in the interviews once. Business benefit came up.
Right.
Relevance came up. Content came up, but reputation didn't. And that is really interesting and really important, because when we're thinking about how do we pitch this as valuable to the company, how do we show the company that there's something in it for them, really commonly we lead with a reputation statement. This will make you look X, but they're not doing it for reputation. They're doing it because their staff will care, or they're doing it for a particular business audience.
Yeah.
Leading with reputation isn't as useful as leading with relevance or credibility, was something that really taught me something that I assumed wrongly, I would say.
Very helpful. Can you just explain what you mean by relevance?
Stuff that they can show their audience that they understand. So how do you, as a shoe brand, become relevant to the teenagers you're trying to sell shoes to? How do you stick out to that audience from every other shoe brand out there?
Right. So it's still like a messaging thing, but reputation puts it in a certain kind of like, you're just a better corporate citizen kind of thing, versus a more, strategic kind of way.
It's content rather than just clout.
Yes.
It's like, we will give you things to say rather than it will make you look good. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Yes. Right. Okay. That makes sense. And it is interesting, because I would echo what you said. I often hear I think it's an extension of they have money and we need money. And the next step is, and we're good and they want to be good. And so like, this is like, these kind of do line up together versus this new model of thinking about it. Look, here are all the ways that the story that you tell, kind of connects. And so it makes sense that relevance and alignment and these kinds of things are just a more nuanced version of reputation.
That.
Right.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. So you also identified several drivers of successful partnerships. So now we've sort of like talked about, the things that are needed, but more to the point, we want to create great partnerships. I mean, at the end of the day, both of us, that's what we really want to have happen, right? Like, we believe that not that companies should, but that there's a real benefit to both parties if it's done well. And so it makes sense that what you did next was identify drivers of of these successful partnerships. I know we're not going to have time to cover all of them, but let's start with some of the ones that you thought were particularly important or insightful or maybe helpful for the audience to think about.
Yeah, sure. So there's another slide on this that will flash up. As you say, there are 6 of these. Also, we don't have time, but there are 2 that I think are really important. One of which is raise the bar, and one of which is prove the power of partnership.
Okay.
Raise the bar. In the research, companies were quite cutting about us as charities, and there is this perception mismatch. Companies think that charities are potentially unprofessional or not polished, and charities think that companies are evil and that they need us to be karmically balanced. Okay. And that perception gap really hurts both parties. And there's some real content in the research about what professionalism looks like. Simple things like turning up to meetings on time, proposals not having typos, but also stuff like if they use particular language, like employee culture, and then you say back to them employee engagement, it sounds like you weren't listening. So professionalism and matching their language is really important. It's hard to hear, but I think it's really useful. And the second of which is just how important proof is. And this is hard for fundraisers because they can't control it. But so frequently companies were like, we gave you $10,000. You said it was going to make a difference. Did it? And being able to say, you gave $10,000 and $10,000 could feed this many children or could fund this much of a clinical trial, even if you're using the word could rather than did. So you're kind of saying this is the kind of impact that you could have made. It was an unrestricted gift, blah, blah, blah. Going back to them to say, this is the kind of impact that you made, and providing proof of that in a story, a photo, whatever it is. There was a real frustration about a lack of proof that came through.
So what you're saying there is that it doesn't have to be this absolute, like, your $10,000 did this exact thing. It's okay for it to be the organizational impact and just, providing good stories or good numbers, that kind of thing, as long as there is actual something. One of those things is there.
Absolutely. We recently helped this person because of donors like you. Is enough. It doesn't have to be your specific money did this thing, but it does need to be we spent some money recently and here's how.
And here's the story that you can use or the numbers that you can use in your materials, which is the extension of that. And, we often miss that step. Or I often find too, Andy, that this kind of connects the two, is that the format in which we provide this proof is so difficult to use that, it's a whole bunch of steps that they have to go through to get it to the place where they could use it internally. And I'm always like, this is the difference between a government impact report where there's all these tiny little data points and like a headline with a story that a company could then put into, a quick email blast or into their intranet.
And again, being
Yeah.
like, hey, what internal comms channel do you use? Oh, you use Teams. Here is your impact report in a way you can copy and paste it into Teams. Suddenly people are heart reacting it on Teams. Suddenly staff will care.
Well, exactly. Yes. Or we love it to be in LinkedIn where, yeah. And I think that this is, to me, that combination of like this professionalism concept, where it does actually get missed isn't, and why I feel it's really important to hear this for everybody is often you are doing many, many things very professionally. This doesn't mean you're not doing anything professionally. It means that the way that companies evaluate professionalism is, a certain communication style or a certain way of presenting material that may not be the way that you are doing it with other audiences. And therefore, it can be perceived as not professional when it was like, oh, well, that ticked all the boxes with individual donors, or that ticked all the boxes with government. But with corporate, it was like we wanted it on a slide, or we wanted it in this format that, of course, is kind of considered common practice inside a company. And that's where I think it sometimes is not totally intentional. Sure, spelling mistakes, that's a different thing. But sometimes I find it's just not totally intentional because it's just not understanding how companies are communicating internally and how individuals are working together in those organizations.
Yeah, completely agreed.
Okay, so let's talk about a surprise. You already said, there were some things that you were expecting before you went in, but there was some surprises. And one thing that surprised me, and I think surprised many of us, is how many people are involved in the decision making. Like, I think we all hear about gatekeepers and senior leaders, and so maybe many of us think there's like 2 people maybe involved in a decision. And I understand that you learned a lot more about how these decisions are made through this research.
Yeah, absolutely. We can bring the slide down. A stat that we found is that if a partnership's worth 25,000 or more, which we want our partnerships to be, an average of 7 people have said yes in a company. Which is pretty nuts because you only get to meet 2 or 3. So you're trying to get yeses from people that you haven't met often. And what is interesting is, as our consultancy, I'm sure yours is the same, Heather, one of the most common questions I get asked is like, how do I get in front of the decision maker? And it's like, which decision maker do you mean? Because there are loads of decision makers at a company. And actually, do you mean the marketing decision maker? Do you mean the HR decision maker? Do you mean the person who isn't the decision maker but can get the CEO to do whatever they want? Because those exist in a bunch of places. And there's a section on the research of which decision maker do you want? Because actually there are a bunch. And it broadly boils down to 2: the senior leader decision maker who implements it top down, or the internal advocate who implements it bottom up. But there are more decision makers than you think. Which one you should go for depends on which one it's easiest for you to get in front of. I did some network mapping with a social mobility charity last week, and I was really surprised by how well networked they were with C-suite people, chief marketing officers, chief HR officers. Delicious. So they should go for the top-down people. Whereas I did some network mapping with an eyesight charity, Sight Loss, and a lot of their contacts were people with lived experience, but more junior. And I was like, okay, well, then we go for the junior decision makers because that's who you're in front of right now. There isn't one singular decision maker. You're not always trying to get in front of the CEO. You're simply just trying to get in front of someone who has some budget and start there.
Right. Yeah. I mean, the extension of what you're saying to me too is, I'm sure you get this where someone says, get me in front of the decision maker, and who is it? And I always think that like, they think I have a secret book off to the side where I'm going to open up and say, for this company, the right answer is this, versus what you just described, which is the right answer depends on your organization and, some of the factors on the original wheel. Do you have internal champions? Do you have the right story for a certain department? Like what, where are the match, where do these things match up? And then the strategy comes from that, which is why it's not a one size fits all approach. But I love the fact that what you're saying is, well, it's not a one size fits all approach. There is an approach that might work for each organization. And then you just have to follow that one, like you build for that. So I think hopefully people are feeling more optimistic about, okay, how you might do this is that find out who you know and who your network knows and where the alignment and the things that make sense are for your organization. And that's your pathway. And it might be very different than the pathway of the person who knows, a different set of people. Which is very encouraging. If a fundraiser was listening today and just took one thing from this research and applied it to their next, outreach corporate conversation, I feel like actually there's already a bunch, but we're going to give one so that people feel like there's a tangible next step for them. What would you hope it will be?
Yeah, this is a good question. And it's one I've dwelled on a lot. I think it's the importance of curiosity.
Okay.
Stay curious. Stay curious, stay curious, stay curious. Ask questions. When we are reaching out to companies, we're so commonly thinking about what it is that we want to say rather than what it is that we want to learn or what it is that we want to ask. And a real sense that came through from the companies that we interviewed is the corporate fundraisers they enjoyed working with felt like translators. They felt like they learned the language of that company and translated it back to the charity. And that requires curiosity, particularly when just because they're both finance companies doesn't mean they're the same.
Right.
Staying curious is probably the most valuable piece of advice that we have. Look at what assumptions you have made and ask yourself what those assumptions are based on and stress test them. Kind of as you said just now, there isn't a one size fits all to this. Yeah. So ask more questions and you'll get better quality answers. Curiosity over assumptions is definitely the key takeaway for me.
Thanks, Andy. And I guess my follow-up question to that, which I think, maybe some people might be thinking is, there's concern around if I ask questions, it's like I don't know, or I might look less professional. Like, I think that's a fear. Like, I need to come with everything fully baked because then I'm like, I know what I'm doing. I have it already. And I think that, going in with questions feels like you might come across as underprepared, but you're saying that's not what you got from this.
No, it's a good question. The thing is, what companies look like on the outside is not what they're like on the inside. Right. And so it can be useful to compare notes. So your question doesn't need to be, who are your customers? Because that looks like you don't know. Whereas you can say, it looks like from the outside, your customers are X and Y, but who is your most important target audience?
Right.
And that way you've shown that you have done some research, but you are also checking your assumptions.
Right.
Or you can say, hey, I saw in your ESG report that you're committed to net zero by 2030. How's that going?
Right.
That kind of, you can ask questions that still demonstrate you've done research, but allow you to retain curiosity, if that makes sense.
Yes, that totally makes sense. And I encourage people to take that advice to heart. I also like when you ask questions that bring it to another level in terms of the impact metrics. Like we can be relatively confident that they are measuring X, Y, and Z. Do you have a specific target in this area? Which one is most important for you right now? Like those kinds of questions again, or to your question about our comment about how to give the story out, asking what channels they're using to communicate with their employees rather than, do you need it at all? Are the kinds of questions that show a more advanced understanding of where they're at. So we're out of time today, which I knew would happen. I still have so many more questions. But I will encourage people to put questions in the chat. We will come back and answer them. And even more importantly, many of the answers to your questions are in the report.
Yeah.
So please do read that. And I know that Andy is very generous about, follow-up questions. So after you've read the report, if you have some questions, then that's a really great time to reach out as well. So with that in mind, Andy, where would you like to connect with people?
Yeah, thank you, Heather. So you can get the research, tinyurl.com/why companies give. tinyurl.com/why companies give is where you can get the research. Mm-hmm. You can add me on LinkedIn. I'm fairly easy to find from this event, or I'm the bold one with hexagonal glasses. Feel free to ask any questions that you have at any point. Either of those places are a good place to go.
Yes. Thank you so much for this. I do encourage you to follow Andy on LinkedIn. He puts lots of good content, sometimes some funny jokes and things too. If you want a quirky sense of humor, you can find that as well. Thanks so much, everybody, for joining. Thanks, Andy, for your time. I really appreciate it. And that's all for today.
Thanks, Heather.
Thank you.